I'm an old school survival horror player. I love horror games. I started out in the early 2000s playing games like Silent Hill and Eternal Darkness, and have now played a huge swath of the genre, including The Witch's House, the Clock Tower series, and Yume Nikki. But I had never played any of the Resident Evil games. So in 2020, I decided to finally go through the series since I knew it was a cultural touchstone for both horror media and survival horror as a gaming genre. I started with Remake and Remake 2 and enjoyed the gothic locations, gory visuals, and meeting some of these iconic characters like Leon that I really only previously saw in memes. I ended up playing the version of Resident Evil 3 that was on GameCube so I could experience the original, as I had heard from many people that it was much better than the remake. I'm not going to get into that here. But as I was playing these games, I was aware that I was working toward a goal of playing one of the most beloved horror games of all time. Resident Evil 4. I guess we're gonna...
Resident Evil 4.
Resident Evil 4. From the get-go, I could tell Resident Evil 4 was different from the first games in the series. For context, I played the HD version of RE4 on PlayStation 4, not the Wii version, and I've been told many things were easier on the Wii, especially because of the ease of aiming with the Wiimote. I made my way through each chapter, and as I struggled to not go on complete tilt, as I died over and over to poorly telegraphed instant deaths, I noticed these differences were not really an improvement. I know people love this game. I know you want to comment here and tell me, oh, it's not survival horror, it's an action game, you're playing it wrong, whatever. What I'm going to tell you right now is that the game was revolutionary, and I understand why so many people love it. At the time, it took a beloved franchise and turned it on its head. Quick time events, tons of high-paced action sequences, and there is good stuff in the game. The over-the-shoulder view did work well, even though it was a dramatic change from the fixed camera angles. I enjoyed the sequence where you play as Ashley because there's routing and puzzles and stuff. It was really survival horror, and I liked that a lot. Another highlight for me was Krauser, that cinematic QTE fight and then running around doing the game of cat and mouse, very Metal Gear Solid inspired. And I did die to the One-Wing Angel version of him a bunch of times until I figured out what to do. I shot him in the shins with a rocket launcher, by the way. Very hilarious. And the game had a lot of dark, brooding moments, which I was a fan of. Seeing what happened to Lewis, having Mike get blown up in his chopper. I even enjoyed Ada showing up out of nowhere and then bouncing away a few times. The story was camp and weird, and the boss fights took the Resident Evil style, mega mutating boss trope to like another level. But did this game hold up on a first playthrough in 2021? No, not for me. I believe it strayed too far from what Resident Evil previously did and missed the mark in a lot of ways. I'm going to break down why I think Resident Evil 4's revolutionary nature was actually a detriment to the gameplay, and why the changes they made didn't work for me. Most of Resident Evil 1 is set in the Spencer Mansion. There's a few offshoots like when you go into the courtyard or whatever that weird shark section is, but by and large you're in one environment. On the map, you see many doorways, meaning multiple routes to the same places. There are locked doors that you open up throughout the game with keys or that only open in one direction, elevators you have to turn on power to progress, and medallions to collect to open up different paths. The same really holds true in Resident Evil 2, where you're exploring the Raccoon City Police Department and sewers. And although 3's design is slightly different, with a lot more mansion-like areas connected via narrow linear pathways as opposed to one big area with small offshoots here and there, the point remains. These are clumps of rooms connected in multiple ways with doors where you open areas to progress in the game. I don't want to say it, but it's Metroidvania-like. What this means is that sometimes in order to get an item or progress, you need to plan a route. You have to look at the map, figure out what doors are open, what keys you have, go back somewhere you've already been to get another item you couldn't pick up before, think about where you may have more zombies waiting for you. Overall, there's a lot of thinking and forward planning to make progress. In Resident Evil 4, every map kind of looks like spaghetti. There's long tunnels that only have one route you progress down. Rarely there are larger areas that have a few routes, but those are small and contained, and they often consist of simply going on one path, pressing a button, maybe pressing a second button, and then going forward. In my experience, this removed most of the element of survival that I love from the series. In the earlier games, I ended up with no herbs, no bullets, and I got to plan out the quickest, safest path, and it felt like I was working out puzzles. It meant I learned to run and flee and to not waste resources. I spent a huge chunk of Remake 2 running in circles from liquors with no herbs, just praying that the new door I opened had a first day sprayed behind it. It was really cool. It ruled. I was terrified I was going to lose all my progress because I chose the right path instead of the left. In Resident Evil 4, though, anytime I was concerned about where to go, there was a little red circle on the map, or just a long tunnel, or just go forward on the spaghetti until you get there. Is this bad? Maybe not. This doesn't necessarily come with a negative aspect for most people, but for me, this strips Resident Evil of something that made the game series what it was for me. Planning and routing and the fear that comes along with trying to look for the most efficient way to do things. I also want to briefly touch on the resource management in this game. There are parts in the game where literally the aspect of what you're supposed to do was use up all your bullets. Like the house defense section with Lewis, or that elevator ascent towards Salazar. I had been juking enemies all throughout the game to save up all these resources, and now I'm just supposed to blow through them all. I got punished for saving up my stuff. And then additionally, if I had used up all of my herbs, there was typically the merchant right around the corner who could sell me a couple of first aid sprays. The biggest culprit of stress and negativity in this game came from surprising insta-deaths. There's long sections where the game's trying to be suspenseful and action-packed, but they're really bad at telegraphing what's coming next. For example, the sequence where Ashley's driving the truck, there's a truck coming up behind you that you must shoot, but depending on where you're looking, you might just hear like a faint honking while you're trying to fend for your life. If you don't figure out what's going on in time, you just get instantly killed as the truck flips over your head and explodes. Yes, the game does show you the truck if you manage to be looking in the right direction. Yes, Ganados are still in the truck bed with you, and yes, you are still trying to kill them and protect Ashley at the same time. The second half of the sequence, though, is even more frustrating as another truck comes from in front of you this time. But again, you're contending with a bunch of enemies, fending them off while you're still just trying to figure out what this new truck even is. This time, in my playthrough, I was trying to kill a spaghetti Ganados guy, and I heard honking and then I was dead. But luckily, there's at least a checkpoint in between these two instant death scenarios. Unlike in the infuriatingly long minecart sequence, I mean, you can do this whole section perfectly, and if you miss the QTE at the end, you have to do the entire thing from the beginning again. Like, I like challenge. I don't even mind dying a bunch. I died to the final boss a few times. I was trying to figure out how to beat him. But the jet ski part afterwards, oh my god, that had me on tilt again. It felt like Battletoads. You have to like memorize the pattern to get through. I honestly died 10 times during this, and each time I had to restart from the beginning while that clock was ticking down. Or the scene with like a random infected thing that the game called It. My chat told me it was called U2. I was floating boxcars while you had to shoot lights to advance. At no point in the game was this ever a mechanic, and at no point in the section was it ever explicitly made clear that this was the right thing to do. Like, I don't know if I missed a hint or something. It's hard to be excited or suspenseful when you're going in a circle like, what am I supposed to do? Oh, I guess it's time for another QTE. And I could forgive like the other things I've complained about already, like the linearity and the lack of resource management, if these action sequences worked well, but they didn't for me. And here's where I have to say, I haven't even complained about Ashley, because for all the complaining everyone seems to do about her, she was only in like half of the game, and those parts weren't even that frustrating. So, people who really love this game may have a tendency to be viewing it through rose-tinted glasses. Viewers of my stream who did previously play this game and know this game really well struggled to remember a lot of these aspects. During my stream, people said everything from like, oh, this seems annoying, but I don't really remember it, to, man, I probably died a lot here 10 years ago, but now I know how it works, so muscle memory kicks in. As a first-time player, though, that doesn't work for me. So, to end my critique, I will say Resident Evil 4 is the Final Fantasy VII of Resident Evil. But you know what? That's okay. It was a lot of people's first Resident Evil game. It has a lot of the hallmarks of the series, and it really helped to take horror games in a new direction, which means the genre's still around even in 2021, and tons of indie games that do the things that I like are being made. I know the series ends up going even more and more into the action vein with Resident Evil 5 and then even more with 6. I've heard quite a bit about 6 it being the worst entry. It's really interesting, though, to see how they took on some of these elements from 4 and built on them, like having a partner. One thing about the series that I really respect is that they try novel elements of gameplay each release, which leads to the newer entries like Resident Evil 7. They switched to first person. It's a very enjoyable and very modern game. The series really returned to form there. Locations to explore, puzzles that make you double back on yourself and consider routes, enemies to sneak by, and the story is still wild and includes these weird mega bosses and resource management and stuff. I want to real quick, not going to take this on a tangent too far, but since I started thinking about this, I've played RE2 again to play Claire's B route, and then I've watched so many playthroughs of Village, and both of those games are so much more successful at those things that make Resident Evil what the series really is, right? I will definitely play Resident Evil 5 to see what else they changed, and RE6 because I kind of love bad games, and I really want to know if it's as bad as people say it is. If you're interested in checking out my playthroughs of Resident Evil 1 or through 4, or just to see me go through more of the series, you can check out my Twitch at twitch.tv/beepsalt. But additionally, I want to know from you what your opinions are on what made RE4 an enjoyable experience. Do you have fond memories of playing the game, or any pet peeves about Resident Evil 4? How do you feel about how it strayed away from what the series was kind of originally doing, and what do you think that they could have improved on? Also, like, what is the best Resident Evil game, honestly? Like, is it still 4 at this point? Do people think that, like, 7 has surpassed? Also, what about Code Veronica? Should I play that? I don't really know anymore. Anyway, thanks for watching this video. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Eighth Castellan of this magnificent architecture. I have been honored with the prodigious power from the great Lord Sadler. I've been expecting you, my brethren.
This is a Clock Tower villain.
Thanks, bro.
100%. He's in the wrong game.
A feisty